everybody, and welcome back to Writing the Rapids, the show where I, Joe Bielecki, talk to writers about writing. Very often those writers have been recommended to me by writers who have previously been on the show. In the case of this month's guest, Anna Poletti, she was recommended to me by Shane Jesse Christmas. So if you like this episode, go back and listen to those episodes with him, and if you liked those episodes with him, make sure you stick around. For over 20 years, Anna Poletti has researched how media shapes the meaning we attach to lived experience. Her recent books include Stories of the Self, Life Writing After the Book from New York University Press in 2020, the Eisner Award-nominated collection Graphic Medicine, University of Hawaii Press, co-edited with Aaron LeCoeur from 2022, and Identity Technologies, Constructing the Self Online from the University of Wisconsin Press, co-edited with Julie Rack in 2014. And her new book is called Hello World through Semiotext. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so in a couple of different easy ways. Patreon.com/NoisemakerJoe. For just $2 a month, you can get these episodes a little bit earlier than everybody else. You can also toss me a one-time donation over at paypal.me/NoisemakerJoe. You could buy my book. It's called Tired. I think it's pretty good. Or you can just do the social media signal boosting type things, liking, subscribing, and so on that everybody asks you to do. I'm also asking you to do those things. Now, without further ado, let's get into my conversation with Anna. So Hello World is a wild ride. I have so many things about it that I feel like I want to say, that I don't quite know where to begin. I guess I think this is the second book that I've read for this show where kink is kind of like the driving element of the story. The other one is Daryl by Jackie S., which I think is like my second most listened to episode, about a man who likes to be cuckolded, and that drives a journey for him into gender exploration and questions about his sexuality and so on. So Hello World is the other side, about a person who is exploring their dom side from a more feminine angle. And that's interesting to me as a person who does not participate in kink, really at all, but is largely fascinated by it, as an art form, as a form of political expression, as just a relationship thing. I feel very much like an anthropologist whenever kink stuff shows up online for me. And I liked this one because it explores what at a glance kind of looks like your standard femdom relationship, and largely goes in depth deeper than I've ever had any sort of need to explore it. And I feel like I learned a lot, and yeah, I don't have really a question to bounce off of that. I just find it interesting. I guess the main point of exploring kink for the character of Seasonal is to sort of try to invert the day-to-day gender dynamic. So yeah, I guess you can talk about, writing from that headspace.
Sure. I was really pleased as you were talking just now that you said you were interested in kink as an art form and for its political potential, because I think that's actually one of the things that surprises Seasonal. And it was one of the things that I really wanted to depict in the book, actually, was eroticism and sexuality as a space of like creativity and aesthetics. where people can come together, for the same reasons that people come together, for more vanilla forms of sexuality, but that maybe one of the things that kink offers people that's distinctive is this sense of like building a world and investing objects with meaning and creating symbolism and actually doing some of the things that we do as writers, in terms of world building and making characters and seeing what becomes possible from those places once you invest in a world like that. I wanted to write about it because, so prior to writing this book, I had written creatively for the theatre a long time ago. And then all of my writing energy went into my academic career. And I was very busy writing works of literary criticism and cultural criticism. And academia requires a fairly constant output from a writer, and it sucks up most of your energy. And I had always known that I wanted to find an opportunity to write in a freer way. And the idea for this book actually came from my desire just to write for my own pleasure again. So initially I was just writing to enjoy writing, rather than writing because I had to, or writing because if I wanted to keep my job, I had to, I had to produce another, article or book or talk or something. And I think that writing for my own pleasure has seeped into the book, because I also wanted to write a book that other people would enjoy. It's my turn to have a dog join us.
Wonderful.
It's a tiny, tiny little dog, who's an attention seeker. So
Fantastic.
We'll try and work around her. But the more I got into just enjoying the writing myself, I also got very interested in the politics and the ethics of kink. And I also wanted to write something that depicted, kink sometimes gets a kind of bad rap, I think, in mainstream media, especially if it has a heterosexual dimension to it. And I wanted to reflect some of what I knew about kinky people, thoughtful kinky people, but also what some people are attracted to in kink, which is that it actually is a place where people are thinking very carefully about how to treat others.
Yeah.
And I really I thought the novel was just, as a form, the novel is the perfect place to do that, because the novel is the place where we can see characters interacting and watch them in this case, try and take care of each other, while also trying to scare the shit out of each other. Like, that's their kind of agreement. Is let's get together and do things that both of us are terrified of and see what happens. And that was fun for me. There was a lot of fun in crafting that narrative where very minor things scare these people, but also bigger things. And I was interested in trying to track that, I guess, in some degree of detail.
Yeah. I have I guess, similar anthropological interest in extreme haunted houses. Where they're allowed to touch you and they, sometimes there's electrical shocks and whatever. And I feel like it's kind of the same type of thing, right? Where I guess I'm thinking particularly about Laszlo. Like the idea of going into an extreme haunted house for me is like, okay, all these unpleasant things are going to happen for like 90 minutes or whatever. And I'm not going to have any choice in the matter. There's a safe word, sure. But I signed up for it, so I'm going to do what I got to do. And then at the end of it, I know everyone's going to make sure I'm okay. And then I can go about my day, and there's a catharsis and everything. So, like, I enjoyed how in a novel like this, I kept very easily flipping back and forth between the two primary characters and like identifying with them, especially one with feminist overtones, right? Where sometimes I'll just find myself kind of deeply uncomfortable the whole way through, and be like, and then I have to interrogate like, why did I feel uncomfortable, and do I like that I felt uncomfortable about whatever it was that it was. And don't get me wrong, there's plenty for me to feel uncomfortable about in this book. But yeah, I liked that that Laszlo made a lot of sense. And then when he didn't, it was like really shocking. And those moments were moments of foreshadowing. And for whatever reason within indie lit, I don't know if the books aren't long enough or if we're just doing different things structurally, that like foreshadowing is not a thing I think about very much, right? Like that's a very kind of like base level, good writers know how to tell the story before the story's told sort of thing. So that when I got to the end of it, I was like, oh, okay. No, he is this type of guy. And maybe I should have known that the whole time. And maybe I did know that the whole time, but I really wanted Seasonal to like be able to do what they were trying to do.
Yeah, it's interesting with Laszlo, because one of the things I wanted to do with him was I really wanted to write a 21st century Bronte hero. So I wanted to write the kind of male character that women writers, particularly the Bronte sisters, were writing in the Victorian period. These kind of incredibly magnetic, what we would now call problematic, charismatic men who are both embody something, I think, kind of, dare I say, universal. Like we can identify with certain elements of them, and they perhaps even embody things for the reader that the reader perhaps wants like a fictional character to embody, but also is kind of inscrutable. Like he's ultimately also making choices or doing things, or is actually capable of things at a base level that the reader finds a bit alienating, or is tempted to walk away with mixed feelings. So it makes me really happy to hear that you had that kind of response to him. But also, I mean, I'm a deeply committed feminist who's like read a lot of feminism. I teach as a feminist. I live as a feminist, but I also really, really like men as humans, as artists, as friends. And so I really wanted to write a feminist book that men were going to maybe want to read, but that also didn't fall into a certain kind of feminism. I'm not sure if this is what you were thinking about when you talked about other feminist books that you found alienating. But I didn't want to write a book that made masculinity the explanation for every problem. or maleness being the thing that everyone has to overcome, and would all be better if there were less men. That was certainly not I don't live like that, but I also didn't want to write a book like that, even though I wanted to have a deep feminist commitment to being interested in the legacy of being gendered for both characters, actually. That, part of what Laszlo is trying to confront is what it means to have been raised as a certain kind of man who's supposed to just constantly embody a certain kind of authority and power. And he's got a complicated relationship with that. It's not just a festival of awesomeness to be patriarchal. He actually is like, there's things about it he's not comfortable with. There's things about it that limit him. And he's looking for an opportunity to have a different relationship to that. So it's not just the character that's raised female that is struggling with gender. I really wanted to write a feminist book that was showing how, strict adherence to certain gendered positions kind of limits everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least can produce for everyone certain points of resistance that at some point in their life they might want to try and think about. And that was also why and we might talk about the use of the they, them pronoun at some point. I don't want to foreshadow that too much, but it was why it was really important to me that when Seasonal's remembering her past, she's a her. Mm-hmm. And in the present, there are they.
Yeah.
Because this is one kind of subtle way, just with the language, I was trying to pattern for Seasonal the encounter with femininity that they're trying to stage with Laszlo. Is they're trying to walk away from something and they think maybe they, them will help that. But the thing they're trying to walk away from and the person they remember is absolutely a woman. Mm-hmm. Or a girl.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I like that a lot. As I, in my life, find myself surrounded by more different flavors of queer people, I find myself wondering things about myself. And like the non-binary question, that feels fascistic to just say the non-binary question, but the question of whether or not I view my gender somewhere more in the middle of a spectrum almost never occurred to me. I watched several like leftist YouTubers transition publicly to women, almost in real time, or as real time as watching YouTube videos can feel. And then also reading Daryl was like, made me wonder about, being a woman. And it was like, I don't know, it was more like, oh, that is a possibility that I had never considered. Let's consider it. Oh no, this isn't where we're going. The idea of being non-binary is almost like less of a question for me. It's weird because I'll like the place I go to get my hair cut is like the queer salon in Grand Rapids, and everybody like asks your pronouns and tells you theirs, and it's rainbows everywhere. And my barber like forgot to ask my pronouns when we went in and was referring to me to another barber and said they, and I was like, okay, that's cool. But it like implies a life experience that like felt very untrue. Yeah. But at the same time, it kind of feels like an escape hatch, because I'll read some of the things that Seasonal thinks about men, or someone will quote from some feminist literature in a video essay or something where it's like, men feel this. And I'll say, I do? I don't think I do. There may be like a low point where I've sort of maybe gotten to that point in my actions or whatever, but like, so it's like, oh, well, that's strange. Because I am a man, but certain like very confident, very intelligent descriptions of men that I do not dispute do not describe me. And that's like bizarre. It's absolutely bizarre. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when I like intellectually, when I'm talking about this in my day job, I think it's really useful to think about the difference between men and women, that is, people in the world, and masculine and feminine traits that the culture attaches to us.
Mm-hmm.
And I think most of us feel alienated in some way from masculine or feminine traits, depending, on what we've been raised into. And one of the things that I wanted to explore in the novel was in particular about feelings. So what is a man supposed to feel, and what kind of feelings are available to a man, and what does a woman allow herself to feel, and what emotions does she do her best to pretend she doesn't have, ignore, sublimate, listen to loud music to treat or whatever. And for seasonal, most of the emotions that she wants the dominant role to explore are emotions that she's never really been able to fit with the feminine persona that she's lived in. So she wants to be angry. She wants to be lustful. She really wants to be able to be greedy and lustful, which is almost impossible for her to feel as a woman. She really needs the persona. And she also needs the invitation from Laszlo. She really needs to feel invited to be lustful, because to just be kind of enthusiastically desiring of someone, she's not been able to do that. And I think on Laszlo's side, he's trying to access a kind of surrender and softness towards another person, a kind of openness and non-defensiveness, or a way of relating where he doesn't have to be in charge so much and be thinking so proactively. And they're both, they both have very complex personal reasons for wanting these things. But it really is about masculine and feminine feelings. And they're trying to collaborate, and they succeed for a little while in creating this kind of world where each of them can explore having feelings and expressing these feelings that have not fitted with the gendered role they've been given in their families and in society and in maybe their professional lives. I mean, I do think the queer conversation, particularly around non-binary gender, has a lot to offer everyone. Because I think we're in the process of working out that actually more people could comfortably express a kind of discomfort or an ambivalence about their gender in ways that are kind of new. Mm-hmm. At least in some spaces, in some communities, in some societies. And I find that really exciting.
Yeah. I do too. for as binary as I am, the do you ever watch the movie Society from the 80s? It's a
No.
body horror movie. It's about this kid who like lives in a very like white picket fence suburban town, and he feels like all the adults are really strange. And then there's a very famous scene at the end. It's this body horror orgy, and all the bodies are like melting into each other, and it's disturbing, and the kid's horrified, and so on and so on. It's a body horror movie. But like watching that movie, I was like, yeah, no, that sounds fine though. This sort of like, why don't we all just become a mass of flesh sort of thing. I for a long time worked on this idea of body noir, where the most horrifying part of the body is itself, right? Like pimples and ingrown hairs and sweat and spit and blood, and like the body is kind of terrible. And so I think about that. I also have mentioned a million times, and I should probably downplay it more because I meditate hardly at all ever and haven't read a Buddhist book in years. But like the Zen Buddhism, like there is no you sort of thing.
Yeah.
Also, I talk about Max Stirner an awful lot and his whole like, that's a ghost. Those are all social constructs, and you should, I guess it's kind of like an early post-structural thing, but he goes beyond that, like, yes, they're made up, but they affect people, and we need to like hold space for that or whatever. He's like, they're made up, and you should treat them that way. And he's very, very like brutal about like, if I want the thing, I'm gonna take the thing. And I like to smush his like radical egoism with the non-egoism of Zen. I think those ideas play really fun together. And so like I need to seek out. I wish I could more easily find stuff about gender like that. That takes all those like really weird like not quite like, I don't know, philosophical punk ideas and says, okay, what can we do?
Yeah.
Because at the same time, I'm, my wife and I started dating like in high school. We were very young, not yet adults, never stopped. We've been married for 8 years. We have a house. We own a house in America and have a kid. And so like, I'm only punk insofar as the like, well, kids, being responsible is the real punk thing. So like, I understand, the paradoxical nature of what I want, was sort of like burn it all down and start again revolution, and the life I'm living, which is a very, very comfortable for 2024 America, on the eve of a new election sort of comfort. And I don't know how that relates back to the book. I guess it doesn't. One of the things that the book made me think about a lot, and it's a really adorable sort of moment from my life. We had just started dating, my future wife and I, and we had discussed, this will tie into the book in a different way. We had discussed via text message that we wanted to kiss each other. I think I probably brought it up. I really wanted to kiss her. So I walked her from school to home, which was a short walk, because I needed to be back at school for play practice. I was in a musical, I think it was. And so the idea was I'd walk her home, I'd kiss her, and then I'd get myself to play practice in time. And I stood there and I looked into her eyes and we giggled nervously and I couldn't do it. And we talked for a little bit. And the conversation lulled and I was like, here's when I'm supposed to do it. and it was like 15, 20 minutes, and I was like late to play practice, and I was like, I can't do this right now. I'm too nervous. The idea was like, what if I lean in and I get like a micron away? And she's like, nah, bro, what are you doing? Even though, like, what I would later learn is called enthusiastic consent had been established like time and time again. Like, let's get this done. We have a goal here. Let's do it. And we could not get it done. Later, our first kiss was during the movie 2012 in the theater, which is a terrible movie, but now has wonderful memories attached to it. So I thought about that a lot throughout the book. Just kind of again with that whole like expectations of what masculinity is supposed to be sort of thing. I do want to, the reason why I said that this will tie in later is the idea of the screen as a sort of utility for the relationship, or like a relationship aid.
Yeah.
That I guess is sort of like a hyper letter writing, which I found useful, or I found interesting, I guess. It felt very real in the book, where it seems like the most philosophizing was happening via WhatsApp.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, WhatsApp becomes the space where the two characters make sense of what they've done when they're together. But it is also where just like you and your almost girlfriend at the time, it's also where they negotiate consent. It's where they feel safe enough to say things that they really want, to speak their desire with a lower threshold for humiliation. But also, yeah, this is where the novel really connects to my intellectual interests. So my last academic book, which came out in 2020, was all about how different media technologies actually enable us to become different kinds of people. So that, there's a lot of really negative associations, right, with social media and screens and all of that. And it's not that I don't take that research seriously, particularly in relation to young people. But these are not young people. These are two people in their 40s who, like everyone else, have a smartphone in their pocket. And what they discover is that through dating apps, and then through WhatsApp, that the smartphone can become this kind of transportation device, that it can allow a kind of immediacy and intimacy in communication, sexting, sure, but also, as you're saying, kind of more philosophical reflections and friendship, that allows two people who actually, well, Laszlo does not have a lot of time. Laszlo is really trying to maintain a very traditional life while doing this. Seasonal has all the time in the world because their life has exploded. And they're kind of in free fall, actually. So the smartphone enables them to have a degree of intimacy and regularity and contact that is actually false. They actually become closer through the phone than they could if they were just talking like this every time they met.
Mm-hmm.
So the smartphone both enables the world building and it enables the intimacy, but it also creates, I think, a falseness of presence, or at least a mirage of presence that can't be maintained, because they can message each other throughout the day. But when it comes to actually trying to make time to meet, it's very complex. But I really wanted to write something. I mean, it's kind of weird. I wanted to write a book. I wanted people to read it.
Okay.
I wanted people to all good. I wanted people to read an actual physical book, but I really wanted it to acknowledge the ubiquity of the smartphone in our lives and recreate something of the layout. So there's, the text messages kind of sit on the page differently to the prose text. Because I think there are so many kinds of relationships that we have now that would not be possible without a mobile phone. And this is one of them, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I found I also found that the texting bits being broken up like that helped the book move. It's 375 pages is kind of intimidating. I feel like I shouldn't be intimidated by book size anymore, but like it was nice to have that, and then it also, paradoxically like made me slow down because of like the content of what they're saying. And it kind of felt like poetry because of the way that the formatting worked. And I also just, like most of the communication that my wife and I did to really get to know each other was via texting. My closest friends right now are people who don't live in a place where it's easy for me to see them physically.
Yeah.
And so like Discord is super helpful. And also with social media, which like I'm getting old. I can feel it. I can, I know when it's going to rain before it rains because my legs hurt. And I also think that social media is becoming less and less for me, which is a shame because I have a podcast to promote. But I remember in college seeing somebody say, you should treat Twitter like writing practice. And I did that for a little bit. And didn't find it all that helpful. But like, as I was looking you up, like your academic work felt very like something I need to read at some point. Identity technologies, constructing the self online, like just feels like that feels like a very prescient sort of thing to be aware of what people who are studying it are finding out about.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm a literary studies academic, right? So yeah, there's a couple of things that you mentioned there that I want to pick up on. One is the decision to try and make the text messages sit as text messages and therefore evoke poetry was also about me trying to give the reader the time to appreciate Laszlo's non-standard English. So there's this kind of way that Laszlo talks, which is not, I mean, he's clearly fluent. He has an amazing capacity with English. And we'll hear in the excerpt that I'll read at the end that he can kind of come up with really evocative images. But there is also something kind of like non-standard about it. And I just wanted to make sure that the reader had the time and the space to kind of get to know his voice a little bit. I was kind of horrified when I saw that the book was going to be 375 pages, because in my mind, I was trying to write this kind of page-turning book that would not intimidate people, that would be this kind of, I don't know, I imagine this kind of little punchy, fun sex book, that people would just maybe move through and feel actually kind of quite light about. And then when Semiotext did the layout and I saw what was happening, I had this kind of crisis moment, because I thought, oh, there's going to be a certain kind of person that doesn't pick this book up now. It's too big. But I couldn't sacrifice my layout decisions, because there's also, pages where there's just a single sentence or two sentences of prose. Like, I really also wanted the object to have this space in it. And I guess that's the literary studies academic in me. That's the person who's, spent my life with physical books, but also teaching physical books and like training students to pay attention to white space and to be thinking about the book as an object. And so I decided to stick with it, knowing that, I was probably going to sacrifice some readers who just would see it and be like, no, too big.
That's interesting.
I think that was all I had to say. Yeah. That's all
I will say the intimidation for me, I think, largely came from because I know I have self-imposed, be it like a deadline, right? Like, I need to get an episode out by the end of the month. So, oh dear, it's a big book. Like, perhaps this will ruin some cred or something. But it's genuine. Sometimes I think to myself, I just need to get a poet on the show this month, because I don't have time. Yeah. I don't have time for a couple novels. I can do 2 poetry collections. So let's find us a poet. But also, like, you find you get to a page that isn't filled with text, and you say to yourself, oh, okay, nope, this is going to be fine. So, and also, like, I'm glad you didn't take out anything. Like, the book had what it needs to have in it. I'm reading a book right now that's 430 pages that I feel does not need to be that long. I understand why everything's in there, but, like, it's commercial fiction. So as a commercial fiction reader, I say to myself, no, this 2.5 hour long movie could have been 90 minutes and it would have been fine. Whereas, I'll watch Inland Empire or something and be like, this absolutely 3-hour movie needs to be 3 hours long. So I appreciated the layout of the book, as like a casual reader, but also as a person who understands the book object to a degree.
Yeah, I'm pleased to hear that. I think I also, because some of my my first academic book was on zine making and zines as a literary form. And this book was partly written with a collage technique. It was quite, I think I was also kind of sensitive to the layout, because the way I had assembled the book was in this kind of cut and paste collage, kind of, Kathy Acker meets zine culture kind of approach. And I didn't think just putting all of that together in very seamless looking traditional layout would work, or at least I didn't want the collage to become that tidy. Like there are some forms of visual collage, I don't know if you look at them at all, where people use like scalpels and they do this phenomenally fine cutting, and then they create an entirely new image out of these very well articulated pieces that kind of come together in a whole. And then there's the kind of collage where you can like see rips and tears and there's big white borders around things and the fonts are deliberately, overlap or something cuts something else off. And I definitely collage more in the latter style. I don't have the patience for the careful approach. And I think maybe that's also why the kind of bigger book feels reflective of that collage technique, which is not trying to hide the different pieces. The different pieces are a part of it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a satisfying answer. I like that. Good work. Good job. I'm glad you thought out your book properly. Yeah. Perhaps less appropriate to the themes of the book, but I guess just as like a contemporary thing. I also appreciated how you handled setting a modern day book, and dealing with COVID. I guess it's kind of set like pre to very early COVID, but
Yeah.
I remember seeing discussions online of people debating whether or not we were going to allow COVID like into our fictions, like into our depictions of the modern world and just like as we write. And I appreciate the desire to like have a place that's safe, like to write a 2020 Western world that doesn't have that. Because it's kind of a bummer that like, 10 years from now, we're still going to be reading books set in 2020, 2021, where like COVID is a major player. But like, it's also a bummer that I can't read a book about the 40s without hearing about genocide. So like, just unfortunately, you can't have 1918 America without the Spanish flu and World War One and stuff. But I like that it was kind of, you said it just early enough that it feels present day, but also allowed for it to be there. Laszlo comes down with a strange sickness and is out of commission for a couple weeks, and then and that's kind of it. But yeah, I appreciated that, because yeah, it is a bummer, and like I also don't necessarily want every contemporary novel I read for the next decade to be a COVID novel.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think this is where I'm lucky because it's not a realist book. Like it's not trying to. It's interested in the social and the historical and the political context in which the characters live, and it's a book that's interested particularly in politics. But because I wasn't trying to write a realist book, I felt like I had a lot of leeway with things like that. I didn't feel as though I was making a contract with my reader where they could expect, a forensic and accurate depiction of everything, I kind of make it quite clear from the very beginning that it's going to be much more like, it is plot driven, but it's kind of impressionistic and it's vignettes linked together. I think, I hope that better COVID novels happen, actually.
Sure.
I'm only encountering at the moment references to it largely in kind of more mainstream literary fiction, that makes mention of mask mandates or vaccination or, travel restrictions or whatever. And I don't think that's what was important about the pandemic. I don't think we're ready yet. And maybe it will be in like 10 or 15 years time when people actually have taken the time, when writers have taken the time to really digest and think about what was important about the pandemic. We'll see some depictions of it that help us as a society and as communities actually come to grips with some of the things that it really did. Because the illnesses, of course, and the deaths were what was happening, but also the disablement of long COVID is what has happened and is happening, and the effects of lockdowns and all of those things. But I really didn't feel like with this book, given its tight focus, that I could do anything else than kind of I think I only make one explicit mention of the pandemic, and it is foreshadowing. It's kind of like the pandemic is coming. Seasonal doesn't realize how alone they are in Europe yet. And it won't be until the pandemic comes that they realize how alone they are.
Yeah. It was in reference to how they view H's abandonment.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is interesting too. Yeah. It must have been during lockdown. I was definitely at work, but I remember coming back to work maybe a little earlier. But I was like working at a radio morning show. There were like 3 people I encountered, and I was in a little booth. I never saw anybody. I was going back through a book I had started writing maybe in like 2017. And it was about like giant invisible jellyfish monsters in the sky, which is like based off of a horror short story from the 30s that I couldn't pinpoint if you held a gun to my head. But because, the jellyfish are putting their tentacles down on Earth and they're picking people up, and the people are going into the sky and disappearing. And so there's not like a mandated quarantine or anything, but people understand we need to not be outside right now. But also like the tentacles start coming in through chimneys and stuff. But so I was writing it with like 3 perspectives. Because the initial idea was the sort of monster thing, but also what if I wrote a horror book where the couple that it focuses on love each other? Because a trope in horror movies, domestic horror movies or whatever, is that like the marriage is already kind of strained at the beginning of the movie. And I was like, well, what if 2 people who love each other have to get through something horrifying? And then the third perspective was a sort of like zoomed out global, like people are doing whatever. And it was written more poetic and flowery, but I kind of like got it. Like I kind of accidentally like perfectly predicted how the people were going to deal with a massive global thing, and it was horrifying to me. And it was so on the nose that I was like, oh, I can't finish this book. I'm gonna have to wait a long time, because if I were to like, the idea was like, oh, it's been a couple years, let's go back to it and see how it is. And it was like, oh, if I were to finish this book and put it out, people would just think it was a pandemic book, and that's not what the book was about. So I still haven't touched it. But I found that funny. At the time, like I remember tweeting quotes from the Google Doc, like just bewildered at myself. And not at all proud of myself, right? Because it was like I had taken a very cynical, very caustic view of the world. And oops. It was a bummer, right? Like I love being wrong about certain things because I tend to be quite pessimistic. So being wrong has become a joy for me. And that was a bummer. you mentioned the politics being in the book, and I guess the other sort of like, I can't think of the word for it. But for whatever reason, in the past couple of years, Hungary has been on my mind. I picked up a book written um, by a Hungarian woman. I met I joined a group of writers, and someone was very interested in Hungarian literature. Had people on the show who had spent time in Hungary. My Hungarian grandmother died a couple years ago, and like I inherited some of her stuff.
Oh, wow.
And so like through all that, I learned certain things about like my Hungarian family and some of the stuff they had to deal with in the 40s in Europe. And so Laszlo being Hungarian was just, one of those like serendipitous things. But I really appreciated seasonal like learning about the contemporary political deal in Hungary to figure out why he left and to sort of, if you can tell why a person will uproot their lives, you can learn an awful lot about that person.
Mm.
And so like uh you know love is not necessarily a theme that's like super prominent in the book, but I never at any point expected seasonal to like fall in love with Laszlo or anything. But it was a sort of deeper kind of more, you know, non-romantic sort of love that she was like going through, and it's like I'm like I know you're not going to tell me, or I know I'm not going to ask. But I do like have a desire to really understand this very quiet, very important part of you.
Mm.
That, whether or not you're going to use that to just beat him in a different way or something, but like, like I really appreciated that as a like a thing to take from the book in my own life, right? Like let's wanting to do something like that, right? To take it upon myself to learn something about what makes someone something felt like
Mm.
a really powerful thing.
Yeah, I think part of the whole agreement between them is that they're not going to be romantically involved, right? Because Laszlo is married, um, and seasonal, is in this free fall after the end of her relationship, their relationship. Um, so love, like part of what the book's exploring is what do people do when love is actually off the table in many ways. Um, but seasonal is really struggling to understand why it is that Laszlo wants the experiences that he's asking for. Like why does he want to be physically restrained? Um, why does he want certain forms of physical pain? Why does he want someone to inflict physical pain on him? Of course, in this very negotiated, consensual way, but also he still wants the pain.
Yeah.
Consensual or not, pain is pain. And also, why does he ask them to lead him towards this consensual non-consent play? Like why is he actually asking to be brought right to the edge of his autonomy? And seasonal's kind of perceptive enough to realize that he's not just going to be able to confess to that just like straight up, like WhatsApp or no. He's not going to be able to actually say that directly because he himself doesn't know. That's part of the agreement. They're both together going, I don't know why I want this. I don't know why I want to do this. Let's do it anyway. So their kind of hunch is Hungary must have something to do with it. But I think also what's useful about Hungary for the book's kind of bigger interest in gender and politics is that we're all a bit more aware of Hungary than we used to be because of what Viktor Orban has made Hungary stand for, both in Europe but also globally. I mean, he went to the Republican convention and addressed the Republican convention. I mean, he really is a symbol of a certain set of values, a certain kind of masculinity also. And part of what the book is interested in are these people that have chosen to leave home and what they're leaving. Seasonal is leaving a very specific and quite banal, and by that I mean quite common, domestic violence, a history of domestic violence in their family of origin. And they go to Europe to do that. And what they meet are all these kind of political refugees. There's a Russian, there's Laszlo. There are these people that have kind of moved in Europe to try and escape certain versions of reality that they can't stand. And I think everyone who reads the news is a bit perplexed by Hungary. But also when I started looking into Orban himself and the kinds of things he says, he does embody some of the kind of entitled rage that Seasonal is trying to perfect in their dom role. So there's this, it's kind of also an opportunity, I think, in terms of the emotional stuff I was talking about earlier, to explore the way, someone thinks they're doing one thing and then they end up like in solidarity with people they completely weren't expecting to, like, wait, what now? I can't, Viktor Orban now makes sense to me. Like, how is that possible? And I really, I thought that was important, both in terms of the way the book really is trying to give a depiction of the dominant headspace that is more forensic than what we usually get in writing about kink. And that did mean, I think, trying to look around for the other cultural examples of how dominance is embodied. And Orban just seemed like a really good current example that wasn't Trump, for example. Because I think there are differences. I mean, they have things in common, but I think Orban, we see in the speech that I collaged in, what's different is Orban is a domineering person from a narrative of smallness and weakness, right? Hungary is small. Our language is endangered. And that's quite a different form of dominance and aggression than Trump, who's defending one of the largest and richest countries in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, like that end of the fascist coin of like, actually, no, we're the ones who are in danger.
Yeah.
And like not a Hungarian historian by any means, but like, there's a history there of like Austria coming in and doing a bunch of stuff, um like there's there's a lot of ethnic Magyar people who kind of get like splashed out of Hungary every time that something happens.
Mm.
Um and yeah, because it's such a unique language, like you can't just assimilate that in to something, right? It's just got to go, right?
Yeah.
I do not know a word of Hungarian. My grandma did not teach me. There was no reason to teach anybody. Um,
Yeah. This is also what I wanted though, because I wanted that. I mean, you and I are both from countries that have this real approach of like integration and multiculturalism. But what I also wanted, and what was great about the use of Hungarian and for seasonal to be trying to encounter a Hungarian, is that I wanted to explore how like desire and sexuality also means confronting the completely unknowable in another person. Uh, really sexuality is a kind of unknowable thing in the other, and you can kind of you can become acquainted with it, but it's always slightly opaque, it's always slightly off-putting and weird, and it kind of never really comes in the way you expect it. And I think that yeah, Hungary and Laszlo being Hungarian is also a kind of an element of that. It's a kind of way of symbolizing, when Seasonal's partner left them, what Seasonal felt their partner had abandoned was the unknowable, questioning part of them, the part of them that they could never really articulate, but that they needed to feel connected to through sex with their partner. And when their partner walked away, they felt as though he was not interested in that unknowable part of them. And they went partly in search of someone who was, but also I think maybe like overcommitted or like deeply committed to paying attention to that unknowable part in another person. But there's a kind of paradox there, right? Like, how do you study the unknowable? It's a kind of ridiculous task to give yourself in a way, but that's kind of what Seasonal's trying to do by looking up words in Hungary and in Hungarian and being interested in Hungary. It's also trying to demonstrate, and I think you're right there, it is a love. It's like it is a trying to love the unknowable in the other, but it's not a romantic love. It's something else. Thought I'd just read some of his text messages. I am my own restraints. I thought my goal was to hang on a beam, and I needed to find the right person who could facilitate that. I learned that it is the other way around. What I need is a person I can trust and whose desires complement mine. And the beam is just one way to find that person and find that trust. I had a dream last night. I was in your house, or rather, somewhere together. I don't know exactly where. I was blind and deaf. My ears, eyes, mouth covered tightly with tape or a hood, I don't know. It deprived me of time and space and locked me inside, and at the same time locked me out from myself. All the world had become was your presence, hinted by the feeling of the stirring of the air as you passed by my chained and naked and hanging body, by the occasional touch, by the pain that came with unpredictable force and frequency, the feeling that I am no more than any other object in the room, with the single function to serve your comfort. It humiliated me, made me hard and wet. Each time I sensed your proximity, I was hoping you'd touch my sex, give me pleasure, comfort, release. But instead it was your pleasure, it was your comfort, your release when you fucked me and ignored me, when you used my body to learn to hurt. And this left me dripping, half mad from denial and confused, but ultimately happy as I never was before. What was it like to wake up from this dream? I did not wake up from this dream. My skin is the only sense I have. One raw surface my body is. I had a fantasy this morning, still half asleep in my bed. I was standing in your living room, chained naked to the wall by my neck, while you had a party with guests walking, talking, having wine. This time there was no hood, no blindfold, nothing to hide behind from the people, from your friends. I remember the feeling of not knowing whether to avert my eyes from those looking at me or meet their gazes with shame and pride. Tell me more about this feeling. This feeling is the feeling I learned to recognize and feel in our exchange. The feeling of embracing my very private feelings in public. Liberating and horrifying. I am my own restraints. When you make me beg, when I'm bound and at your mercy, my restraints do not matter anymore.